You know how people often say, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, the words of a Gemini Mars can put you in critical condition. Speaking. This is Saturn, girl, and I'm tripping on this transit, yo. Why? Because on July 20th, Mars, our malefic master of mayhem, will enter the most awfully obnoxious sign. Yes, that's Gemini. And he'll remain there until September 4th. Gemini, more like Femini, am I right? As chairwoman of the International Gemini Council, I can legally call us obnoxious and get away with it. Although I heard the Supreme Court just ruled that Geminis have full immunity now. But let's look at the fun chart now, shall we? You see, here's Master Mars at the very end of Taurus. And let's go forward a couple of days. And boom! Here comes Speed Racer. He's a demon on wheels. When Mars enters Gemini, that means Gemini enters all of you. I mean, I can put a little Gemini in you too. You should get you a Gemini Mars partner. We're like the Energizer Bunny. We keep going and going and going and going and going. I mean, I finish so often I barely remember starting. But my therapist says that hypersexuality is frequently a coping mechanism for those of us with ADHD. And which sign is most known for that? We Geminis will pretend to listen to you even when we aren't. We could be looking straight at you and still giving canned answers like, oh wow, that's wild, or how did it go? Meanwhile, if you ask us any details, just watch us squirm and stammer. And if you are a Gemini, that automatically makes you bisexual. You can argue with reality all you want, but I don't make the rules. Okay, sometimes I do. And if a Gemini ever tells you that they're at top, it really means that they want you on top. But Mars in Gemini isn't all about sex, though. We're super fun in other ways, too. For example, we love practical jokes, but you probably won't be laughing when the punchline puts you in the emergency room. We're also absolute contrarians. Even if you agree with us, we'll still tell you you're wrong. But seriously though, this is a very important transit. In fact, every time Mars changes signs, it's quite important because it signals that a new area of life is about to get contentious. In this video, we're going to talk about the meaning behind Mars in Gemini, and then what it means for you personally by doing your horoscopes for the occasion. So watch this shit till the end, okay? But first, what does Mars even mean in astrology? He's action and aggression, vitality and violence, injuries, illnesses, and enemies, conflicts and confrontations, men and masculinity. More positively, he's our passion and our drive, even victory and triumph. What about Gemini, though? Gemini is ruled by Mercury, the planet of speech, intelligence, and expression. We see all those significations attached to Gemini too, don't we? Virgo is the other Mercury-ruled sign. But Virgo is more like Mercury turned inward, into the world of analysis, whereas Gemini is like Mercury turned outward, into the world of exploration and gathering knowledge. Gemini also gets much of its meaning from its place in the solar cycle, which is right before the summer solstice. So this is that time of year when new plants are starting to sprout and animals have to face the consequences of their filthy behavior. Children. Therefore, Gemini is associated with youth, and we Geminis are often known for having a childlike disposition and a youthful appearance. Gemini also rules the hands, and we'll frequently see Mars and Gemini in the charts of people who play an instrument or sports. Did you ever see the Ricky Bobby movie? Remember, he's like, I don't know what to do with my hands here. I don't know what to do with my hands. See, he couldn't have been a Gemini. We always know what to do with our hands. I've been thinking about some key phrases for Mars and Gemini, though. Number one is the breath that blasts. Mars in Gemini is like a fire-breathing dragon. You know how people often say, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, the words of a Gemini Mars can put you in critical condition. Speaking with a Gemini Mars is sort of like getting I mean, you know what I mean. Number two is relentless investigation. Mars in Gemini is like that nosy reporter who will do anything for a scoop. Or like those lawyers who assault you with questions. Like, remember Tom Cruise in the movie A Few Good Men? He's questioning Jack Nicholson and he's all like, did you order that code red? And Jack Nicholson is all like, you want answers? And Tom Cruise says, I want the truth. And then Jack Nicholson claps back, you can't handle the truth. See, to me, Tom's character is a Gemini Mars, while Nicholson's character is a Capricorn Mars. We Gemini Mars natives are known for arguing. In fact, people will tell us we're arguing even when we aren't. Like, this is just how I have conversations, okay? One of my exes used to say to me, stop arguing. And I would say, I'm not arguing. And they would say, that's arguing. The third one I thought of was aggression expression. And this includes unpleasant news, typically about battles and conflicts. World leaders and officials will often make unpopular announcements during Mars and Gemini transits. We'll often see wars of words erupt. Think of public feuds or verbal attacks through the media. The problem is that these wars of words frequently escalate to throwing hands or pulling triggers, as recent events have shown us. Now let's talk about some examples of people with natal Mars in Gemini. First, we have the United States. I know it's a country, not a person, but you feel me. The US is known for aggressive words. Like, remember that phrase, either you're with us or you're against us. Or more recently, a former president threatening to take out his political rivals using SEAL Team 6. But the Supreme Court said that was okay, right? Gemini Mars often contradicts itself too. For example, the current president talked tough on Bibi Netanyahu, telling him not to cross this red line, which he did anyway, and we didn't do anything. We just kept giving him weapons. Then we have Martin Luther King Jr., who also waged a war of words, but with more constructive results. King fought racism with his oratory skill and his ability to inspire others. Organized resistance and civil disobedience are also characteristic of Mars and Gemini. And those were two primary tactics he used in order to push for racial equality. We also have Courtney Love, who I love. I loved her band Hole. And her screaming went hard as fuck in the 90s, didn't it? Remember that song Violet? Go on, take everything, I want you to. Courtney became a stripper by the age of 16, which is sort of Mars and Gemini, but still terrible. What's also very Mars and Gemini are the fights that she's been in. She famously sucker punched Kathleen Hanna, the front woman of the band Bikini Kill. She's even been accused of domestic violence against her now deceased husband, Kurt Cobain. Even her daughter, Frances Cobain, has some choice words about her. Speaking of fighting, though, we also tend to see boxers and fighters with Mars and Gemini. Like Mike Tyson. He became the youngest world heavyweight champion in 1986 when he was only 20 years old. But then, of course, he was also known for his domestic abuse and was even convicted of rape and sentenced to 3 years in prison. And then there's Joe Frazier, who famously beat Muhammad Ali. He was the world heavyweight champion from 1970 to 1973. That is, until he was beaten by George Foreman. Yes, the grill guy. And then there's me. I'm obnoxious, aggressive, and I'll argue with you even when you say I'm right. And I go from words to hands faster than a Bugatti goes from 0 to 60. But my hands are better at pleasure than they are at pain, if you feel me. Or sometimes pleasurable pain. See, I have an insatiable thirst, so I have to guzzle you like Gatorade. Good thing I have a big mouth. People will even ask me, yo Saturn girl, what that mouth do? And I'm all like, eat pussy, suck dick, and talk shit. And they usually say, Gemini Mars, yes? And I'm all like, but what sort of events do we see while Mars blasts through Gemini? Well, last time Mars went through Gemini was August of 2022 to March of 2023. You see, Mars went retrograde during that time, so it was an especially long transit. Mars was in my 5th house of children back then. And I didn't get to see my daughter for almost a whole month while we moved to a new state. That was a really difficult time for me. Remember, we also see unpleasant announcements. Around that time, President Joe Biden warned that MAGA Republicans were a threat to democracy. And that's when Dark Brandon was born. Then we had violent announcements, like when Vladimir Putin announced that he was drafting between 300,000 and 1.2 million men in order to fight in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And this brought about a mass exodus of Russian men. Around the same time, we got the announcement about the death of Queen Elizabeth II after a 70-year reign. I suppose this could have been bad news for some people. After that, Alex Jones, the famous conspiracy talk show host, was ordered by a judge to pay $965 million to the families of those killed at the Sandy Hook massacre. He had been spreading misinformation that none of the people had actually died and that they were all crisis actors. Jones really was involved in a war of words, or what he may call an info war, but he lost, and he had to pay up. But what does this mean for you? Tensions are high and arguments abound. Remember, it doesn't take long to go from throwing shade to throwing hands. So use some extra self-awareness and think about the consequences of what you're about to say. A great remedy for this, especially while Mars is in Gemini, is exercise and sports. Like, I think of soccer, basketball, or even martial arts and boxing. My favorite thing to do is roller skating, yes. We're also going to have a tendency towards intellectual sparring. Just try to be aware of when you're wasting your time and wasting your words. I know Gemini frequently does both. If you play an instrument, now's the time to get back to practicing again if you let it lapse. You see, during this transit, we'll have especially active and dexterous hands, although I may be using mine for some other fun things. But in order to find out how Mars in Gemini will affect you personally, we have to do your horoscopes. And remember, we do these for each rising sign. So if you don't know it, you can watch for your sun sign. So let's start with Aries Rising, shall we? Our Aries Rising Hermes. This means Mars is entering your third house of short journeys, extended family, and communication. When I see this, my first thought is road rage. So between now and September, make sure to leave earlier. Give yourself additional time on your commutes. Slow down and drive the speed limit. And keep that middle finger on the steering wheel, please. This could also indicate conflicts with siblings, aunts, uncles, or cousins. It could be about money, but being that we're this close to election season, I bet it'll be ideological. Either way, though, with Mars in the third house, the risk of impulsively blurting out harmful or antagonistic words is high. Just be aware that things you say now can result in cutting people off later. So try to consider the consequences of saying something before you say it. But how about Taurus Rising? Our Taurus Rising Hermes. So for Taurus Rising, this puts Mars in your second house of possessions, material resources, and finances. To me, this indicates money burning a hole in your pocket. And I mean overspending when you should be saving. It could be that you spend too much money on a particular item or buy something you know you shouldn't. I mean, like splurging. See, this is the do not splurge transit. The other possibility, though, is that you have a surprise expense. If you have a small business, it could be a big piece of equipment that you have to replace. The lesson of this transit, though, is about being frugal and wise with your money and your resources in general. But let's move on to Gemini Rising, our Gemini Rising Hermes. See, this puts Mars entering your first house of self. That's your mind, body, and spirit. This will feel much better than having Mars in your 12th house. You'll be more active, assertive, and confident. But you need to be careful of being a bully or imposing your desires on others. It's exhilarating, isn't it, to get a surge or rush of energy while Mars is in the first house? But it also means that we'll have to be more self-aware. And why is that? Because we'll be rushing around and we'll want to take on lots of projects. But you have to be careful not to hurt yourself. The risk of cuts, bruises, scrapes, and burns is higher at this time. So pay attention to what you're doing, especially in the kitchen. Many of my clients also get surgery while Mars is in their first house. So just be aware. But let's move on now to Cancer Rising. Our Cancer Rising Hermes. This means Mars is entering your 12th house of self-undoing, isolation, and mental health. I won't lie. This can be an agitating transit. If you've had a tendency towards any self-destructive behavior in the past, you'll likely be confronted with it now. And this is a time to face these sorts of issues. Do your best to anticipate your vulnerabilities and arrange your time to avoid potentially harmful situations. We have to avoid the "fuck it" mentality, where we tend to justify self-destructive behavior. You'll also not want to socialize and probably be left alone. So make sure you keep a line of communication to at least one or two close friends that you can vent to when you need. You'll be aggressively solitary and are best left alone. But let's move on to Leo Rising. Our Leo Rising Hermes. So for Leo Rising, this means Mars is entering your 11th house of hopes, supporters, and friends. When I see this, my first thought is fights with friends. Similar to what I said about the 3rd house, these will probably be ideological disagreements, but you want to be careful you don't hastily cut people off because of a disagreement. We need people who support us, and this transit can indicate that we're antagonistic towards them. Mars in the 11th house can also make us cynical and negative. We say things like, oh, what does it even matter anyway? Or everything just sucks. Remember, this is a temporary phase, and do your best to be present and live in every moment. It helps us to recognize that life permeates everything. But let's move on to Virgo Rising. Our Virgo Rising friends. You see, this means Mars is entering your 10th house of life direction, career, and public life. I typically think of this as fights with bosses or authority figures. You may get resistant to changes at work, or perhaps you get sick of being micromanaged or dismissed. I call this the Jerry Maguire transit because we could just blow up one day and decide to quit our jobs. You also have the added risk of a bad reputation. Mars in the 10th house can bring negative attention, so be careful you don't do anything that you wouldn't want plastered all over social media, okay? But let's move on to Libra Rising. Our Libra Rising friends. So for Libra Rising, Mars is entering your 9th house of beliefs, higher education, and long journeys. This most often shows up as ideological conflicts. And by that I mean arguments, usually with family, about politics and religion, right? We get a little fanatical during these phases. You may even reject an old way of thinking because Mars cuts things off, right? And get very passionate about a new one. Dare I even say fanatical? Legal conflicts could also be exacerbated at this time. But don't worry, they will pass. Better luck will come after the beginning of September. If you're in school, though, this could mean fights with teachers or professors. You need to cultivate a little diplomacy here. Please don't burn any bridges with people who have control over your GPA, okay? But let's move on to Scorpio Rising. Our Scorpio Rising Hermes. So for Scorpio Rising, this means Mars is entering your 8th house of death, debt, fear, criminality, and other people's stuff. Mars here has several different likely expressions. Firstly, there could be a death in your life. This is the most extreme example, but it would most likely be a pet, since Mars rules your 6th house of pets. You also want to hide your credit card. Similar to Taurus Rising, the tendency to be frivolous with money is high. You may rack up debt that you didn't intend, or you have to take care of surprise expenses, and you'll most likely have to put them on credit. The other thing is that we'll gravitate more and more towards shady or illegal behavior. So just remember that deception, manipulation, or trickery you do during this time will come back and bite you in the ass, okay? But let's move on to Sagittarius Rising. Our Sagittarius Rising Hermes. So this puts Mars entering your 7th house of marriages and partnerships. Usually I think of this as fights with our spouses and romantic partners. The risk of breakups is especially high, but they don't necessarily happen during the transit. Oftentimes we say horrible shit during this transit, and then later we can't take it back and it blows up in our faces. And then we have splits or breakups that sometimes resolved. If you don't have a partner, though, you'll probably find yourself getting antsy for one. You'll get sick of being single and get more and more of a desire to put yourself out there. If you're not on dating apps, you should be, but don't let it consume you. I just use 2 dating apps, and I casually check them in the morning or once a day over coffee. Just gently put yourself out there and be open to new connections. But let's move on to Capricorn Rising, our Capricorn Rising Hermes. So this means Mars is entering your 6th house of health, obligations, enemies, and pets. I don't know if your cats are assholes like mine are. I'm kidding, I love them. But having issues with animals is very likely at this time. It could be that a pet gets injured or needs surgery, or just keeps ripping up your shit. Like my cats love to leave hairballs in inconvenient places. This transit also lights a fire up under our butts, and we get the drive to get things done that we've been avoiding. So knock stuff off that list. Just be careful about pushing yourself too hard, because you'll get burnout, and you don't want to get sick. Do your best to only take on a few manageable tasks a day. And don't add things to your list without finishing off some others first, okay? But let's move on to Aquarius Rising. Our Aquarius Rising homies. This is me, yeah? And Mars is entering our 5th house of children, sex, pleasure, and fun. I think of this as fights with our kids. They may be especially incorrigible or resistant to whatever you tell them. Sometimes this indicates C-sections or medical procedures for our children. This could also represent being temporarily separated from them. I think I mentioned earlier that last time I had this transit was when my daughter and I were in the process of moving to a new state and we didn't get to see each other for almost a whole month. If you don't have children, though, you'll likely be very horny. And you need to get out there and meet people. Or maybe you just need to have fun again. Sometimes it's not just amorous activity. It could be going to a concert or a sporting event or something that you find fun. Once again, for me, it's roller skating. And you may even meet a fun person at such an event, you see. But let's move on to Pisces Rising. Our Pisces Rising friends. So for Pisces Rising, this puts Mars in your 4th house of home, father, family history, and private life. My first thought, though, with this one is things breaking around the home. Just make sure you're not the one who's breaking them, okay? I mean, we'll see pipes suddenly burst, toilets stop working, drywall damage, or malfunctioning appliances. So it's time for maintenance, isn't it? Sometimes we have conflicts with landlords or mortgage companies. So make sure you have your leverage ready. I know I turn into a bit of a Karen. I'm like, let me speak to your manager, you know? If your parents are still alive, though, expect to have conflicts with them, or they may have health issues. Your parents could say or do some nasty things around this time. But remember, you're an adult and you aren't obligated to speak to anyone. Keeping your peace is much more important than keeping other people happy. Anyway, I hope this was useful. Please let me know down below in the comments if any of this has rung true for you or what experiences you've had in the past with this transit. I'm excited to hear. Thank you for watching. Like this video and subscribe to my channel. Please also consider tipping me. You can give through Super Thanks below or use my PayPal link in the description. It helps me keep making such wonderful content. And remember, I do the best readings. It's science. You can book through my website, saturngirl.org, or contact me directly. All my info is below in the description. And remember, I love you. You're beautiful. And have a wonderful whatever it is you're having.